we're going to talk about today. Okay, before I get started though, I want to give, I want to give the kids a candy cane. So if you want a candy cane, will you come get one? Come on, Jojo, I need you. You got to be my example. Okay, Sheila, I'll give you one. Come on, Jojo, come get one. I need you. Come on, kids. I want to ask you a question about it anyways. I want you to help me. Come on, Jojo. Come on. You're chicken. Hey. You want to give one to your sister? Yeah. You going to be scared back there? Come on. Okay. All right. Okay. You guys want one? You can have them afterwards. They're all stuck up in here. You can get all you want. Here, I'm going to bring them back to you. You can't hide back there. JoJo can't have one because she embarrassed me and wouldn't come. So, you got to have them. They're good for you. Okay, so I wanted to tell little ones. You probably heard the story. You know the story behind the candy cane? Yeah. Well, it can't be verified, to tell you the truth. But we're going to make up our own story about the candy cane. So, well, you know the candy cane, they say it was made in the shape of a shepherd's, what do we call that? Staff. Yeah, shepherd's staff. Because they were the first three that showed up. I'll say three, the shepherds showed up to worship Jesus, right? And of course, if you're a good Christian, you know that later on down the line, they turned it upside down so we could make it the big J to be about Jesus. And you know that the red, of course, is the blood that he shed for you. So as you eat your candy cane, you think about Christ and his life he gave for you. The white is to represent his purity. Some say that hardness represents the solid ground that you're to build your life upon. And so there's all kinds of different stories you can find about it out there in the online. And but I wanted you kids to think about that as you celebrate Christmas. I hope you'll take time as you gather around the tree with your parents and wherever you are, and when you eat a candy cane, you think about Jesus and you think about the letter J. It'll help you remember that Christmas is more than just presents. It'll help you remember that it's about the birth of a baby that we're gonna talk about this morning. You think about what that means in the shedding of his blood, and you think about the purity of his life and those kinds of things. And so, while that story can't be verified, I like it. I'm okay that we robbed it from somebody and and turned it into something good. So I'm glad about that. So this morning, Ricky read for you out of Matthew. He set up the lesson for us out of Matthew chapter 1 about the birth, of Jesus coming, being born, of Mary giving birth to baby Jesus, and that he was born a virgin, or she was a virgin. He was right. So he came through that supernatural mean that Mary was impregnated by the Holy Spirit. That's important because these magi are going to show up later today, and we're going to talk about that. But they're going to show up and say, well, where is this king? And you see, Jesus has the right to be called king because of this very thing that Matthew's going to write about. If you know anything about Matthew, he's the most Jewish writer of all the books in the Bible. He quotes something like 47 different times from the Old Testament, more than any other writer. He's writing to the Jews and to others, but he's really writing to Jews, and he's trying to convince them that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. And he writes in that language stronger than any other writer. And so he's doing that. But he's also not just, there'll be some theologians that will say, well, that's what he set out to do. That's all he set out to do. But that's not true. He also set out to tell Gentiles about this. And he's going to cover that in our story today with these magi that show up. These magi are Gentiles. They're not Jewish. They're Gentiles. So in a way, Matthew says not only will Jews worship Jesus, or he should be worshipped, but Gentiles will worship him. And then, of course, in Matthew 28, he gives the Great Commission. He says, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He who believeth and is baptized shall be saved, and lo, I'll be with you always, even unto the end of the world. And so he says, go into all the nations. And so you can see in Matthew, he's more than just reaching Jews, but he is using them as an example, and he's going to do that today. I had some questions I wanted to ask you. What comes to your mind first if I was to ask you, if I said to you, Jesus Christ, what would come to your mind first? What's that? Savior? Anybody else? Son of God? Salvation? Heaven? I actually looked this up online. Some people said Savior, Redeemer, Prince of Peace, bright and morning star, Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, my all in all, my wonderful counselor, and mighty God, Abba. None of that was mentioned in today's lesson. The Magi show up and say, where is this baby that was born a king? And when you think of Jesus Christ, one of the words that should come to your mind right away is king. You should think of kings. There was another poll done to ask people. They said, what do you, this was actually one of them talk shows, you know. They said, no, top 10 people have been interviewed, you know, whatever, like Family Feud. When you hear the word king, what comes to your mind? What do you think the top answer was? 67% of the people answered this. When you hear the word king, what comes to your mind? What's that? Candy. Say it? Oh, candy? Elvis is what they said. 67% of people said Elvis. 20-some odd percent said Burger King. And 13% said Christ, that he was, you know, he would come to mind. So I just thought that was interesting. Hey, let's go to God in prayer. Father, I just thank you so much that we're here this morning to worship you. I love the songs that Logan led, just thinking about how mighty and how great you are, and just it is well with our souls, Lord, because of what you did through your son Jesus, his willingness to come, to be born of a baby, and so that we can have this relationship with you. But it is just so powerful to think about that amount of love that you shed upon us and the glory and the grace that come from that. And I pray that as we think about kingship this morning, we think about what it is that we offer back to a king that has everything. What do we give a king that has the cattle on 1,000 hills? What do we give a king that has it all? I pray that we'll look deep in ourselves and ask ourselves, do we see you as king of our life? Or are there other things in our way? And so I just pray that you would help us as we work through this lesson to see the importance of placing Christ as the king of our life. So I pray in Jesus' name, amen. And so I want you to get this. You know, I told you I want you to see that Matthew is trying to convince these folks that Jesus is the Messiah. It's important. You know, we don't like to read genealogies. At least I don't. Anybody here like to, you know, go read Matthew chapter 1, Mark, Luke, you know, so-and-so begot so-and-so, and so-and-so begot so-and-so. If you're anything like me, pretty soon I'm down to the bottom of it. And I'm like, whoo, glad I got through that. But it was important in Matthew's letter here. He said in Matthew 1:17, he says, thus therefore were 14 generations. See, I'm not even going to read them all, but I'm just going to sum up like he did. From Abraham to David, 14 generations. From David to the exile in Babylon was 14 generations. And from that exile to the birth of Christ was 14 generations. But what I want you to see is Matthew said, I'm going to prove to you all that Jesus has the right to be king. He has the right because he was born through the lineage of David. And that's important. Because in the Old Testament it said, David, your child, shall sit on the throne, and he shall reign forever. And he came through Abraham, because you remember the promise in Genesis 22 to Abraham, said, Abraham, I'm going to number the seed. Your children, you're going to be more than the sand of the seashore and more than the stars in the sky. So in order for Jesus to be a legitimate king, he had to come through that lineage. And Matthew records that. If you look at the other lineage, they don't go down that road. They leave out part of this. But Matthew is showing that by his lineage, he has the right to be a king. He fills all of what was said in the Old Testament in the prophecies. And that might not mean as much to you and me. It meant a lot to them in their day. If you didn't come through the right bloodline, you couldn't be the Messiah. And so he sets that up for them, and I just want you to get that. So then, let's go to chapter 2. But he says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of the king of Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. One thing I want you to get from there is he didn't say who will become king. Jesus was born king. He was king the moment his daddy put him in the womb of Mary, and he was a king, and he was born a king. And he deserves everything a king deserves. And we'll see that as we go down about through some of this, about the gifts they bring. In this first sets of scriptures, he sets up who we're going to talk about. He says we're going to talk about the Magi from the east, the good guys from the east. We're going to talk about the bad guys from the west, Herod. I'm going to talk about a child born, a baby. And his mother is there, but she's not really much in this, in the sense of in this picture. She's not going to take an active role other than she's the mother of Christ. So he's born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod. I don't know if you know anything about King Herod, but King Herod was kind of he's Herod the Great. He started out in like BC 37 and he went until like 4 BC, and that's when he died. And the reason we know Christ was born somewhere between 5, 6, and 7 is exactly because of that, because Herod had to die. And when he died, we know Christ had to be alive before that. And so that's why we know that Christ was born somewhere around 5, 6, 7 BC. It just depends on where you want to take a look at. And that's why the dates on the Gregorian calendar are sometimes wrong, because they don't account for that period of time. But he was born before Herod died. And anyway, I tell you this because we don't know a lot about Magi. We know Magi came from that term. They're Easterners. They probably came from Babylon. They could have came from Persia. You might remember the story of Daniel in Daniel chapter 2. He was a dream teller, right? He could tell the dreams. Same place. Some people say that Daniel even had a school. He taught this. But Daniel, you remember when he was before Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had this big dream. You remember Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and Daniel's in prison. And they can't interpret it. He calls in all his magi. He calls in all those people that can interpret dreams. And he says, man, I had a dream. It kept me up. Basically, I'm paraphrasing in Daniel 2. He said, kept me up all night long. This thing is driving me crazy. I want you to tell me about my dream. And they said, oh, king, yes, we'd love to do that. Tell us the dream. He said, oh, no, guys, it ain't working that way. I want you to tell me what I dreamed. And then I want you to tell me what the dream means. And they said, oh, king, nobody has ever done that before. No one's ever asked us to interpret a dream without telling us the dream. And they stalled. Pretty soon he says, I think you people are stalling. He said, here's what we're going to do. You're either going to interpret my dream, or I'm going to cut you up in little pieces. And then I'm going to go home and I'm going to burn all your houses. And they were scared. And so the word went out when the king said, kill them all. He said, you kill all of these soothsayers and these magi people, if you will. And so they went over to get David, and David said, hey, whoa, what's the problem? Let me talk to the king. And God gives him the vision, and David goes in and says, oh, king, I know what God gave you. He gave you a vision of the future. What's that? Joseph, thank you. That's right. Thanks, BT. So Joseph goes in and he now I got my train thought. But Joseph goes in and interprets the dream, and he says, hey, you're seeing the future. You're seeing future kingdoms. You're the gold head of the statue. He sees this big old statue. He says, that's you, Babylon. But one day you're going away. The Greeks and the Medes and the Persians are coming, right? The chest plate. Then he gets down to the legs, which is Rome. And he just moves on down. And then he says, then there's this big old rock. It comes and it smashes the statue. That's God, because one day God's kingdom is going to take over all kingdoms. But with that said, a lot of people want to know where these magi came from and where they learned this stuff. We don't have all the answers. What the Bible doesn't tell us. What I want you to know is it's very likely that they learned these things way back, and they studied. And to be a magi in their day, you had to be scientific. You had to know astrology. You had to know the stars. Many of them said they had scientific degrees in their day, that they studied the science. They were very educated. They studied Scripture. Here's what I want you to get out of this. We don't have all the answers. One thing we do know, they looked for the coming of Christ. And when the star appeared, they said to themselves, the time must be right. And they got on their little, whatever they were writing. And some claim it could have been years looking for the Christ. Some say months. There's really no saying. It's not like they woke up one day and just made a 5-mile journey. These magi had been studying and listening and looking for the coming of Christ for a long time. And they got up and they went looking when they saw the star. Here's something I want you to think. In this story, let's read this story, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Think about this with these magi. He says to them, the time of King Herod, magi. Well, I was telling you about Herod. You know, Herod was a really wicked person. You know, King Herod was, Caesar Augustus said of him in his writings that it was better to be a pig in his family than it was to be a child, because if you were a child, you don't know your fate, because he killed his wife. He killed 3 of his own sons. And then he built a tower there in Jerusalem, and it still stands today, they say. He didn't know where he was going to stand. He built aqueducts. Some claim he's responsible for the invention of cement. That's how he built those big pillars under the water, they think. But what I want you to get is he was liked by Rome. He was placed there in charge by Rome because he taxed the people heavily so he could keep them, Rome, happy with him. He built all these big projects. But he was fearful about anybody who might get in the way of his being ruler, being king. And so when he wiped out his wife and his children, because he wanted nobody to take his place. When he was on his deathbed dying, he told his guards, you go out and kill about 140 people, citizens, so that when the city is mourning for their death, they'll be mourning for my death. Now, guards didn't carry that out if you read the history, but that's what he wanted. He was a cruel, mean ruler. And so these are the characters that are in the story. So when they asked, this is what's funny. So when they had come to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. I want you to see something. When they followed the star, why didn't the star take them to where the baby was in Bethlehem? This is the interesting part of the story. They take him to Jerusalem, and they tell this story to Herod. And so in the next few verses it says, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Whenever they showed up, but this is another part of the story, don't go correct the manger scenes, but we don't know how many showed up. More than 3 probably. And whatever they showed up with and whatever credentials they had, they scared Herod and they scared all of Jerusalem. And so they show up with some kind of power. They show up with some kind of authority. Many believe they had letters. But whatever it was, it scared Herod and it scared all of Jerusalem. Here's what I want you to get. So he goes to Jerusalem, and he's going to quote from Micah 5. And when the king heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had called together all the people, chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. This is Micah. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. This is an interesting part. So here are the Pharisees. Here's the teachers of the law. Here are those that are supposed to know all about the birth of this Christ child, right? Supposed to know all about this new king that's coming. These gentlemen, these magi that are probably Gentile, we know they're Gentile. They travel all this way. The star takes them to Jerusalem. He asks them where the baby's going to be born at, and they say Bethlehem. These Gentiles rode for weeks, months, to find out about the Christ child. And the church and the upright and all those that were supposed to know all about this lived roughly, some people say, 5 to 6 miles away from Bethlehem. That's how far it is from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And did not go seeking the king. The Gentiles came from thousands of miles away to hear about the birth of a child that was going to change the world forever. And the religious rulers of the day wouldn't travel 6 miles to go see if he was really being born. You know, that would be like us here. And I said, hey, man, the Christ child's being born down in Kirby. I said, let's load up and go. Nah, let's not go. It goes to show that you can read your Bible and know a lot about the Savior, but not necessarily really do what it says, right? He calls all of the religious people of that day, and he says, where is this child going to be born? He's going to be born over here. They don't even go looking for him. Why did these magi, something had to happen in their life. We don't know what it is, but something. God spoke to them directly. I don't know what it was. But something told them, go seek this child. They didn't go seeking a program. They didn't go seeking some church. They went seeking a son, a person. And they weren't let down. They found the child. They found the king. And yet the religious leaders who only lived a few miles away could not see him. There could be a warning in there for us. How close are you to Jesus, but you can't see him? You come every Sunday? Come every time the doors are open. You see Jesus? Or do you come to get something that, I don't know what it is, but these religious people who knew where he was supposed to be born, not even when they said they were going, didn't even say, well, let's go. We got to check this out. Herod says, go see if you can find him. It's interesting what he says here, but you brethren in the land of Judah are by no means, well, I'm sorry, I read it, 7. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go worship him. You think Herod wanted to worship him? Sheila says no. You think everybody that acts like they want to be religious really wants to worship Jesus? You think that when someone says, something about, especially if they come to you secretly, you want to talk about the church, you think they have good intentions or bad intentions? Herod come to them secretly. He didn't want nobody else to know. Hey, go check this out. When you find this child, let me know so I can come and worship him. He had no good intentions, because later on, when they don't come back, he puts out a decree to kill every child 2 years and under, every male child. We know that that Joseph gets told to go to Egypt and to flee from there because of that. There's a lot in this story that we could look at. We talk about, he says, for out of you will come one who will be the shepherd of my people, Israel. We know that Jesus Christ is the great shepherd, right? We know there's nobody who can take better care of your life than Jesus. There's nobody who's looking after you more than he does. There's nobody who would go the distance that he went. Nobody that would shepherd us better. And yet these people 5 miles away wanted nothing to do with the shepherd boy, the king. It took Gentiles to come from a long distance to see, and they weren't let down. So 9 said, and they had heard the king, and they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was, and when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. They'd been following the star. Some theologians have a really hard problem with this, because we're told in the Old Testament we're not to get into deviation. We're not supposed to be playing with tarot cards or wherever they are. We're not supposed to be trusting in I'm trying to think of all those things that are out there. Ouija boards or people, palm readers. And so they have a problem with this, because it's like, well, how come God used Magi, a star, to lead them to Christ? I really don't know, other than I'll say this: God controls the stars. God can change people's lives by anything he wants to use to bring people to Christ. He can take any brokenness, whether it's through sports, whether it's through music, whether it's through, singing, whether it's through all kinds of things. God can use all different kinds of things to lead people to Jesus Christ. He used a star to lead the Magi. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. It's kind of the same way we should be. When we find Christ, we should be overjoyed. When God's at work in your life, and when God is leading you, because I believe he does do that, we should be the people that are the most happiest about that. Why God chose that avenue, I don't know. But I know God can use anything he wants to use to bring you to Christ and to bring other people to Christ, to take any kind of brokenness and make it whole. And so when they saw this star, man, the Bible says they were overjoyed. They were like, yeah, we're not lost. You feel that way when you're saved? Yeah, I'm not lost. Yeah, I know the truth. I wake up in the morning. I know what's expected of me. I know how to live. I know I got a king that loves me. I got direction in life. These people were satisfied with that. I mean, more than satisfied. It said they were overjoyed. And on coming to the house, they saw the child. Well, here I'll just say this real quick. This really blows our manger scene, because it says, coming to the house, they saw the child with the mother Mary. This isn't right after Christ was born, right? He's already moved from the manger. He's in a house. So some people think maybe a year or two has gone by since they've showed up. So don't go back and correct all the manger scenes, but more than likely it wasn't three people. More than likely he's not in the manger, he's in a house. But that's not the point. The point is they showed up to see a child. And they found a child. They didn't show up, like I said, to find some kind of program. They didn't show up to get, some denomination. They didn't show up to get anything but to see this child that was prophesied to be born a king. And they weren't let down. And they got there, and then they offered these gifts. And he says, and so to the house they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Sometimes, I'm kind of an excited kind of guy. I like to clap. I know we're in Church of Christ, so I'm pretty careful, Jack. I like to shout a little bit. I also think just like these Magi did, when they walk into the presence of God, they bowed down. I don't know that if you walk into the presence of God, you'll be able to even open your mouth. You might just fall prone on the ground. You might just not say a word. You might just be amazed. And these people walked into the house, saw Mary and the baby, and they bowed down and they worshiped. They didn't worship Mary. They worshiped the baby. They worshiped the King. I hope when you come into the presence of Jesus Christ, you do the same thing. You bow down. What's it mean to bow to a king? Is Jesus worth being the king of your life? Is he the king of your life? You treat him like the king. You give him the best of gifts. That's what he's teaching here. He said these guys showed up and they bowed down and they worshiped him, and then they opened their treasures. It's the Greek word is where we get the word thesaurus. We get a treasure of words. And they opened up their treasures. And their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and incense and myrrh. Gold represents the royalty of Christ, right? It represents, it's something that's refined to get gold, but it's a representation of what Jesus Christ is. He's worthy to be king. And so they give gold. They give incense because that's what the priests use. They use it, frankincense or incense, and they use it as a fragrant odor. And priests would use it all the time during their prayers, anointing. And so you have Christ there, who's worthy, and then they give myrrh. Here's an interesting one. You know what myrrh was used for? Healing. Burial is what they used it for a lot. They used myrrh when they were burying bodies. Think of yourself going to a baby shower or baby birth. You just have birth and you show up at this baby birthday party and they said, "What did you bring?" "Well, I brought him a certificate over here from the funeral home." I mean, you weirdo. What's wrong with you? These guys showed up and brought the gold and the incense and the myrrh because they know this baby child was going to die. They brought the myrrh because Christ he was born for a very purpose, and that purpose was to die for you and me. That seems weird to us to show up at a birthday party like that and bring myrrh. But Jesus' plan was to be born and was to die. And they came prepared for that. Let me ask you, do you give God freely of all your gold? You give him the incense, the sweet aroma of your life? Maybe we take these gifts backwards and say, "God, I give you myrrh because I died to myself," right? Isn't that what Paul said? "I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but it's he that liveth in me." Or maybe when Jesus said, "Take up your cross and follow after me daily." In this book, Matthew says Jesus has the right to be the Son of God because of his lineage, because of his birth, being supernatural, that he was born a virgin. And in this place when he says, where is the king? In this book, if you were to read through all of Matthew, he would say, well, the king is in a lot of different places. In John 19, he's the king of your heart. I'm sorry, in John 19, he's the king on the cross, because that's what he says in John 19. He's going to the cross. Ephesians 3, he says he's the king of your heart because he comes into you to live. Hebrews says the king went and sat down at the right hand of God. Jesus is a lot of things in a lot of places in our life. And to these, but I would tell you, you could give these gifts backwards. And then having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. I'll tell you this, Jesus brought them by the star. He took them out by the star. But the way he brought them isn't the way he took them home. He brought them one way, and he sent them back another way. Now, they gave the baby a gift, another gift, I would say, by not going back the way they were going to go, because they didn't go tell. Herod said, come tell me. They were warned not to do that. They didn't do that. They followed what they were told to do by God, but they could have. One of the gifts they granted the baby was life, because they didn't go back to Herod and say, hey, we just saw him over here in such and such a place. What I want you to know is that God said, when you come to me, you become a new creature. So when you come to Jesus Christ one way, you leave another way. These magi came one way and they left another way. When you come to Jesus, your life will be changed and you will leave differently. And if you don't, then you haven't been changed. But he says, in Corinthians, he says, everyone who comes unto me becomes a new creature. The old is gone, the new has come. I hope when you think about this baby child during this season, you place him as king of your life. And I pray you give him the gifts that is honorable. And when I say that, I'm not talking about money. Remember what he said about the Macedonians when we talked about that in Corinthians? He said they gave of themselves first to the Lord, and then they gave. The only gift that God admires and wants from you is you. He wants your life. And so if you start there with this baby, you'll be doing good. You'll be doing good. If you're here this morning and you don't know this child, I pray you would come and let us talk to you about him. I pray you'd come and put him on in baptism. But that all depends on where you are, right? If you need to learn about him, then let's come study about him. If you end up believing, confessing, repenting, man, we'll get in the water. If you haven't been in the water, you haven't named Christ as your Savior. Remember he said in Romans 10:10, if you confess me, to the others, I'll confess you before my Father. I don't want you to leave here not knowing Jesus. Anything can happen to you at any moment. No one's guaranteed the next 10 minutes. And so Logan's going to come sing this song, and all it is for us in the church is a means for you to make your way down front if there's something we can do to help you. Come on, Logan.